ونصح الأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى آتاه اليقين وتركنا صلى الله عليه وسلم على المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك ولا يتنقبها إلا ضال. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in His noble book, أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم بأساء والضراء والزلزل حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله ألا إن نصر الله قريب. Do you consider that you will enter Jannah, that you will enter paradise, and that you will not be put to the test like those who came before you were put to the test? They were presented with trials and tribulations until the earth shook underneath their feet. And the Prophet and those who believed with him said, when will the help of Allah come? So they were shaken so much that even the Prophet and those who believed with him said, when will the help of Allah come? They have been tested so difficultly, with so many difficulties and hardships. They're thrown out of their homes. They're called liars and mad poets. There's a boycott against them. Their families are turning against them. Their fathers, their mothers, they're attacking their homes, destroying their livelihood, just because they say, Allahu Ahad, Allah is one. And they're shaken to the point at which not the most strong amongst them is tested, but the weakest. Those who are regarded as the outcasts of society. They're the ones who face the hardest test, because there's nobody to protect them. So we know, for example, amongst the most, in fact, the most sacrifices given in the early days of Islam were those whose lives were gone. The first martyr in Islam isn't a brave man with big bulging muscles or known to be a fighter like Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib or Umar ibn Khattab, whom the shaitan would cross the road. The first martyr in Islam is Sumayya. Sumayya, the mother of Ammar bin Yasir. Sumayya, who refuses to accept what the mushrikeen of Mecca say to her, that Hubal is your Lord, Alat is your Lord, Uzza is your Lord. And she says, Allah is my Lord. And that's all she knows. She's not highly educated. She's black. She's a slave. She's a woman. She's all of those things that you would regard in society, would be the weakest. But our deen is built upon the sacrifices of such people. When Ammar himself, who sees his own mother being killed, his father being killed, and the Prophet ﷺ comes along and sees him and he says, Sabran ala ali Yasir, fa inna maw'idukum al-jannah. Patience on the family of Yasir, because they have an appointment with paradise. Why is that important, brothers and sisters? Why is this old story that many of you probably know, why is that relevant in times like today, where we are living in a place of security, safety, ease, wealth? You're at university. Many people in the Muslim world can't even afford to do that. So why are these stories relevant today? What's the importance? And why even the need to relate such stories? Well, we already began by saying that Jannah does not come cheap. You will be tested. The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, though some people say the hadith is weak, إِذَا حَبَّ اللَّهُ عَبْدًا فَابْتَلَاهُ or ابْتَلَاهُ, is when Allah loves a servant, He tests him. And in another hadith is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes good for a servant, He tests him. And what kind of tests are Muslims today, in your lifetime, facing? So I'm not going to relate stories of other people. I'll just relate my own. Just my own. Most of you, at least I'm sure as Muslims, understand that we as Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day. It's a requirement. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this a fard. It's the second pillar of Islam, and it is what defines, it's one of the defining characters of a Muslim. Sometimes you may miss it, sometimes you become lazy, you may forget, you may miss your prayer, especially now as prayer times become so close together. But I want to tell you of an instance that has stayed with me from the day that it happened until now, from which a person reminded me about Salah and its importance at every time. Some of you may know I was a captive of the United States of America at the Guantanamo Bay detention facility, a place that has been held open now for 20 years, where the first condition of being a prisoner in this prison isn't that you're a terrorism suspect. The first condition is that you must be a Muslim. That's the first condition. Muslim from 45 different countries all over the world, from Asia, from Africa, from Europe. It doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white. It doesn't matter what language you speak. If you're a Muslim, that's the first condition to be a prisoner in Guantanamo. So before I was taken from my home, in front of my family, in front of my wife and children, at gunpoint, by agents of the CIA in Pakistan, where I was, in 2001. Shortly after that, I was taken with a group of Muslims who were being captured from all over the world and put onto this military plane, a US military plane. They tied my hands behind my back, they shackled my legs, and they put a hood over my head and made me bow into the ruku' position and took me in this way. The sounds of the engine, the roar of the military engines, of course, deadens all other sounds, but you can make out other sounds. So you hear the sounds of dogs barking that are being brought to you, close to you, to frighten you. You hear the sounds of American soldiers cursing and screaming in words that they can barely pronounce, in Urdu, in Farsi, in Arabic. The sounds of prisoners screaming in pain. And in the midst of all of this, they put me onto the floor of this aircraft, a military cargo aircraft. And there I'm seated, again with my hands tied behind my back, my head hooded, and my legs shackled and a strap put across my legs like I'm some kind of cargo. I know there's others next to me, but I'm frightened to speak. I'm terrified, because this is a war. They say it's a war on terror. It was a war on terror. It was a war of terror. And they say, I sensed next to me somebody. I whispered as loud as possible, "Salaam alaikum." The reply comes back, "Wa alaikum salam." "Min ayna ant?" Where are you from? It's a Libyan. He says, I'm a Libyan. We have a conversation. I'm conversing with a guy that's next to me in the similar position. And that brother then he says something which was the point of me mentioning the story. He said, "Akhi, hal sallayta salat al-maghrib?" He's asking me at this moment, at this most terrifying moment, where I don't know whether I'm going to live or die or see my family ever again. He's asking me now, at this moment, of all moments, not where are we going, not what's happening, not how are you, but have you prayed Salat al-Maghrib? And I'm thinking, Ya Allah, forgive me. I don't even remember if I prayed Salat al-Asr or Dhuhr. But here's this brother sent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remind this forgetful servant, Inna salata kanat al-mu'minina kitaban mawquta. that prayer was fixed at its prescribed time. He's here to remind me of this. In this situation. So I say to him, أخي أنت على اليسار فصلي. You're on the left, lead the prayer. Now at this moment, because we're not supposed to talk, it's illegal against the rules to talk. An American soldier comes next to me and he puts a knife to my neck. I can feel the blade, the cold steel against my neck. Now look at this. He says, if you speak again, and then uses the MF word, I'll slit your throat. Look at this. Just imagine that for a moment. Because what happens next is both funny and deeply emotive. What happens next, all you know. The brother next to me says, Allahu Akbar. And there's a knife next to my throat. It's funny, right? But at this point, I say, Allahu Akbar. And now I am in a state of salah. A salah like you cannot imagine. A salah with no takbir al-ihram. A salah with no ruku'. A salah with no sajda. A salah with no facing the qibla. All of those things that you know and take for granted, none of them. Not even wudu. Did Allah accept our prayers? Yes, Inshallah. We are the ones of whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. Those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lying, sitting and standing. It doesn't matter. What's important is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the state of your heart. He knows that you're trying your best. He knows that you're doing what He says, اتَّقَ اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Fear Allah as much as you can. And in this moment here, the test that we're being facing is the test of our prayer, is the test of our belief, is the test of our identity. So imagine that. A salah with none of those things. I was taken from there to a facility in Bagram, which was a US detention facility. And in this place, I saw brothers murdered. 2 prisoners beaten to death. One of them with his hands tied above his head to the top of a cage, an Afghani brother, who they kicked repeatedly whilst he said Allah, Allah, Allah until he died. That was his test. And inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him the highest rank of Jannah al-Firdaus al-A'la. Time is short, and inshallah I will try to finish with a little more reminders, but up until that time أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على نبيه الذي اصطفى وبعد. This deen of ours, brothers and sisters, is one that the Prophet ﷺ said, بدأ الإسلام غريب وسيعود غريبا كما بدأ طوبى للغرباء. طوبى للغرباء. Islam began as a stranger and shall return as it began as a stranger, so glad tidings for the strangers. In today's world, many of us Muslims, you can see what's happening with the World Cup. You can see it right there. The hypocrisies, the lies, the double standards, we see all of them. No politics in sports, unless there is politics in sports. Muslims are good when we're benefiting from their money, otherwise they're bad. We're seeing one after the other. And we expect that. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can see this. But we should neither allow this for us to become despondent, nor should we capitulate and break our resolve to what we are seeing constantly. Because it is, for a fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-dunya sijn al-mu'min wa jannatul kafir." That this dunya, this life, this temporal life that will end, is a prison for us, a prison of sorts. That we know that this isn't the ultimate life, that it will end and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take us somewhere else. And as we know, as He says in the Quran, وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ وَأَبْقَى, that the life of the hereafter is much better and lasts forever. So let us continue to work for that. And if difficulties come along, we can look to the stories of the Sahaba. We can look to the story of Bilal radiallahu anhu, taken into the burning heat, buried neck deep, taken out, and then stones, rocks that takes 2, 3, 4 people to pick up are placed upon him. And they say, "Who's your God?" Wanting him to save, wanting him to commit shirk, wanting him to. And in that state he could have. After all, Ammar bin Yasir said that. But his heart was filled with Iman. And Allah forgave him and made him amongst the most prominent of companions. He could have. But Bilal radiallahu anhu becomes an example for us, because when they say that to him and they put these rocks on top of him, what does he say? Ahadun ahad. This cry of Ahadun ahad was so powerful. It was the battle cry of the Muslims at the Battle of Badr. That's how powerful it was. Ahadun ahad. And that's what he would say. And you know, just as the brother, he began with the adhan, didn't he? As we do, all our salawat. You know, in Guantanamo, there's this amazing thing that happens every single day. To this day, there's still 35 brothers held there without charge or trial. After 20 years. 20 years, no charge, no trial. But there's a thing that happens which demonstrates our purpose on this earth, and it demonstrates other people and what their purpose, or what they think their purpose is. Every day at Salat al-Maghrib, what do the Muslims do? Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, isn't it? That's what we do. So there's no masjid there, so one of the brothers stands up and he calls the adhan. But simultaneously, at that time, there's a huge American flag right in the middle of the prison camp. Massive, it's huge. And it can be seen from everywhere. And at this time, the loudspeakers, which are again all around the island, all around the prison camp, they're going off playing the US national anthem. At the time, this isn't to attack the Maghrib Salah. It's not to attack the adhan. It is also US military protocol that at sunset this happens. So now what you have is a battle for the airwaves. And also a demonstration of two distinct groups of people. One group faces a direction, and the other group faces a direction. The US military, the soldiers, wherever they are on the island, they're required to stop, face that flag, stand at attention, and salute the flag. The Muslim is also required to face a direction and to salute the object of their devotion. Tahiyatu billah. Allahu Akbar. It happens every day. It still happens. And the question we always used to ask, in fact one of the Australian brothers, he said, look, two groups of people worshipping the object of their devotion. Which one is sincere? Which one would do it outside of this situation, and which one would not? So my dear brothers and sisters, there's so many stories I could tell you about so many incidents that can help a person, that can help me, that helped my brothers in incarceration face what we believed was the greatest of trials, which was our freedom. And you know, we as Muslims are supposed to regard, and we look at, for example, a group of people who are afflicted, slain with some kind of disease or some kind of fitna or some kind of difficulty. We say, praise be to Allah that He didn't test us with that kind of affliction. That's how we thank Allah that He didn't put us through that. And in the same way, I thank Allah that He didn't afflict me with some of the afflictions I've seen other Muslims face, even non-Muslims face. People who've lost entire families, people who've lost relatives, people who've lost a child, people who've lost their own limbs, people who've lost their health, people who've lost their homes. All of these are ibtilaat, which I don't know how I could deal with them. If people ask me, how did you manage to take 3 years in solitary confinement? I say that's nothing compared to some of the tests Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put many people through. A couple of weeks ago, I visited a brother in Morocco, in the city of Casablanca, Dar al-Bayda. And he put into context for me just how, when I sometimes think, I talk about Guantanamo like it's such a terrible thing, for me, this brother spent 19 years. 19 years, that's probably the entirety of some of your ages, in Guantanamo, held by the world's most powerful and vociferous advocate of democracy, freedom, human rights, and all of that nonsense, held in that place that's designed only to keep Muslims for 19 years. And what does he say? This brother? He says, I praise Allah for what He put me through. He built me as a human being. What He put me through, He built me as a human being. Yes, I lost relatives while I was in prison without trial. Yes, I lost my freedom. Yes, I lost my life. But I pray that I gained mardatullah, the pleasure of Allah. I pray that I gained that. I raised my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And brothers, I'm going to tell you a little story, inshallah. I'm going to finish on this story because it connects our deen very, very much to what's happening. So one of the things that we saw in the early days, it doesn't happen anymore, but in the early days, we asked for our Quran. Can you imagine you're held in this place where everything's taken from you? Your freedom, the food we eat, the clothes, they gave us orange jumpsuits to wear, the food was disgusting and not even cooked for years. You're in a strange place in Cuba. Most of people had never even heard of where's Cuba and didn't know that the Americans had an island in the heart of Cuba, which was diametrically opposed to the United States. So everything was unfamiliar except for the Quran. So we as Muslims asked for the Quran, and the Americans said that we will give you the Quran because that is part of our ethos, that we allow you your religious freedom. So thank you. But how did they give us the Quran? I'll give you two instances of how we received the Quran. One was like this. Soldier picks the Quran up, and we're in the cells, and he throws it. Come get your Quran. Learn how to kill Americans. That I saw with my eyes. But the worst one was when they ripped the Quran into pieces and threw it into a bucket and then urinated on it. Now, this is about standing firm in times of difficulty. I want to ask you a question. To us, to a Muslim, if you saw that, what would be your instant response? Don't give me the response. Just think about what your instant response would be. Instant. That was our response too. But the difference is, we couldn't do anything. Sometimes we were shackled, sometimes guns to our heads, sometimes in a cage. I mean, all the time in a cage. We can't do anything. Other occasions, we'd have a Quran in our cell. You'd come back to the cell after they've taken you off to interrogation. You come back and you found that the Quran is in the word. There's swear words written in there. Well, there's blueprints on it. So this was designed to break us, to test what are you going to do? But look, and again, when I was in Morocco last week, I met the brother who began this resistance. He told me how he did this. He said, We told the Americans, thank you for exercising your rights of religious freedom and giving us this, but if this is what you're going to do to the Quran because of me, take it back. Yes, this Quran gives me the most solace. أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. That this Quran gives me tranquility. But if you're going to do this to break me, take it back. My brother, who's a hafiz, will teach me because I'm not. So that's what happened. The Qurans were all sent back to the bastions of freedom and dignity and human rights. They took them back, and the brothers started to teach. خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَ. The best of you is those who learnt the Quran and taught it. They began to teach the way Prophet ﷺ taught his companions. Remember when the angel Jibreel came to him and said, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق? How did he reply? ما أنا بقارئ. I cannot read. He's known in the Quran, he's as Nabi al-Ummi alayhi salatu wassalam. And he taught his companions from word of mouth, and they memorized primarily in their hearts. That's why the word hafiz doesn't mean memorize, it means to protect. And they protected it in their hearts. And when at the battle of Yamama and Musaym al-Kadhab claimed to be a prophet, they came out in their hundreds to protect the message of the Prophet ﷺ. And all of them started to get killed until the Sahaba sat together and said, if we don't put this book, if we don't compile these parchments and scattered writings into one book, we fear that the Quran and its reciters and its memorizers will be lost. So that's why we have a book to this day. That's why we have a book. It was compiled after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. Because the Quran was revealed to the hearts of men ever before it was written into a book. And so that's how we learned. That's how the brothers taught. Those who knew taught those who didn't know. To the Americans, to our jailers, to our captors, to our tormentors, to our torturers, this was unbelievable. But to us, it was going back to the source, to the origin of what this deen is about. You can try to break my body and my bones, which you have done, but my heart belongs to the one who created it. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, this is just one small story I wanted to give you. There are hundreds of stories of resilience, of standing firm in times of great difficulty. There are stories even in this country. And inshallah, I just want you to be hopeful and thankful. Hopeful of a great outcome in the future, inshallah. And thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He puts you through trials and tribulations. So that, as the brother who said to me, the brother who led this resistance, he said to me, something people say is that I would never have been able to survive that kind of tribulation. And he said, I replied to them by saying, Wallahi al-Azim, you do not know who you are until Allah puts you to the test. You do not know who you are until Allah puts you to the test. So finally I make a dua. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allahumma a'izz al-Islam wal-Muslimin wa adhil ash-shirk wal-kufr wal-a'da'in. Allahumma wahhid sufuf al-Muslimin. Allahumma wahhid sufuf al-Muslimin. Wa aslih dhata baynihim ya Rabb al-alamin. Wa sallallahu wa sallim ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Aqim as-salam.